Welcome back to Inside the System. I'm Jasmine Logan, and I'm joined by Emeritus Political Science Professor Dr. David Canervo. Today we'll be covering news in American politics relating to President Donald Trump's recent tariffs, 2 new bills blocked in California, and how Florida is contemplating adjusting their child labor laws. So stay tuned. $25% tariffs on vehicles shipped to the U.S. started last Thursday, with duties on parts set to begin by May 3rd. After weeks leading up to that news, it might seem less groundbreaking now. But now, President Trump has imposed jaw-dropping, history-making new tariffs last week. Amy Kiley reports on how they could affect average Americans.
President Donald Trump is imposing a 10% tariff on imports from all countries, plus higher rates for Cambodia, Vietnam, China, the European Union, and more. Here are 5 ways experts say Americans might feel the impact. 1, higher prices.
It's thousands of dollars. We're talking at least 2% of the median household income that this will cost American households.
Most economists predict U.S. businesses that pay the tariffs will pass on some or all of the costs to consumers. The Trump administration downplays that.
The businesses don't have to pass them on, or the producers in the other countries can eat the tariffs.
2, an economic slowdown.
What you're seeing here is a potential haircut to GDP for 2025 of about 3%.
J.P. Morgan predicts a global recession if Trump maintains his tariffs. Economists say a 1930 trade war deepened the Great Depression.
We know what happened in 1929, 1930 in the crash.
Trump supporters note other countries don't have to retaliate.
They're going to bring their tariffs down because they need the U.S. to be active trading partners.
3, blows to retirement funds if the stock market doesn't fully rebound. 4, high interest rates if the Federal Reserve sees too much inflation. And 5, growth for some domestic manufacturers. Economists say they're the biggest winners under Trump's tariffs.
We have to save the people in the industries of the United States.
I'm Amy Kiley reporting.
So Dr. Canervo, as we just heard, J.P. Morgan predicts that if Trump continues with these tariffs, it will lead us into a recession. What would a global recession look like?
Well, it would mean a slowdown in business in certainly all of the major producing countries, countries in Europe such as Germany, Italy, Britain, France, as well as the United States. And it would mean that there is less trade going on, that people are going to lose their jobs, and that it would look a little bit like the recession, certainly of 2020, 2021, which we had as a result of the pandemic. The hope is, of course, it would not look like the 1930s, where we had 25% unemployment and things were really very desperate in this country. Trump is taking us back to the 20s. Let's hope it stops at the 20s and doesn't move into 29 and 30.
Very true. And, as we know, a lot of Americans were really upset about the way our economy was in 2020 as it was impacted by COVID, right? And so, part of what Trump ran on is kind of taking us in a different direction and lowering prices and increasing job growth and things like that. And so taking us back to his previous term might not be the best choice, right?
Well, that's probably true. I think certainly the last part of his first term. What we're seeing already is that some of the major companies are anticipating a slowdown in business and perhaps a recession. And what we're seeing is that in, for example, some of the car manufacturing companies have already issued layoffs because they're anticipating slower car sales as prices go up. And we are going to see price increases as a result of the tariffs. $10,000 per new automobile in some cases. Most every car, even those made in the United States, have some foreign parts. And so any car is probably going to have a price increase. That might mean people buying used cars. But then with the demand increasing on used cars, those prices will go up as well. So it's a real problem that we're facing with the potential for higher prices. The other side of the coin, though, is of course that President Trump is hoping that this will stimulate more manufacturing in this country, less dependence on foreign producers. Whether that will happen, of course, remains to be seen. Even building major factories like car company factories takes 3 or 4 years, and so this isn't going to be an immediate turnaround. The other side of it is that, of course, perhaps these tariffs won't last too long if, in fact, other countries that we have reacted to, that Trump has reacted to, which place tariffs on us, might want to negotiate lower tariffs on both sides.
True, but as of right now, that doesn't seem to be the case, right? A lot of the countries that we are imposing these tariffs on are coming right back at us with retaliatory tariffs. So unfortunately, it's not working out maybe the way we hoped it would so far. But like you said, this is very short term, and we'll have to wait to see what happens in the long term.
Right. Certainly, you're right that China has hit back at us with I think it's a 43% tariff or so, and that's very high. And of course, we buy a lot of materials from China. A lot of the things that we see today in our homes are made there. On the other hand, Vietnam, which is not a major supplier of ours, but we do buy some things from them, has offered to perhaps take their 1.1% tariff down to 0. And so that's maybe one example of successful negotiating on our part, and perhaps bullying on our part as well, because they are a very small country. But at the same time, we might get some relief, but we don't depend very much on Vietnam for products.
They're definitely not our biggest concern.
That's
and
right.
They're definitely not our biggest trading partner like China, Canada, and Mexico.
That's right.
But as we know, economists support the fact that trade wars is what deepened the Great Depression in the 1930s. Could these trade wars that are kicking off now have similar consequences in the long run?
Well, unless cooler heads prevail and smarter heads prevail, that's unfortunately a possibility. And that's the fear that is stoking things like the major decline in the stock markets around the world, actually, not just in this country. So there is that fear that one action by one country, such as us, will lead to a reaction in another country, such as China, and that if with China's reaction, we will raise it even some more.
Gotcha. So kind of just tit for tat, back and forth, and nothing gets solved.
Right.
Well, I hope that is not where we're heading to. I hope that we can find a way to lower these prices for Americans like we've been wanting all along. But we'll be right back after this short break to discuss some new policies that have been blocked in California.
The black truck? Hey, Christina from accounting.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, I used to date a girl named Christina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then she dumped me for my best friend. You want to see some photos of them that I took?
I don't.
I thought we talked about this, buddy.
Buzzed and overshared again?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna call a car.
That's a smart idea.
So yeah, I know, that's why I did it.
Hey, you're gonna get back to the top of the mountain.
Does that mean I'm gonna get back with Christina?
No.
Oh.
No.
California state lawmakers rejected 2 bills last week that would restrict transgender athletes in women's sports. This comes after Governor Gavin Newsom said on his podcast that having trans athletes in female sports was unfair. Steve Large spoke to Newsom about his position on this matter.
Governor Gavin Newsom arrived for an event at this fire training center at Modesto Junior College as burning questions remained about his revelation the longtime LGBTQ supporter opposes trans athletes in women's sports. The presser came a day after Democratic lawmakers killed 2 bills to ban trans athletes from women's sports. I asked him about that.
What's your response to that vote? And also, should there, from your position as governor, should there be a California state law that restricts trans athletes from playing in women's sports?
These kids just want to survive. And so the question you're asking is the question we've been asking ourselves for months and haven't been able to answer. What is that finally? How can you make this fair? And I haven't been able to figure it out.
No, our reaction to what he said at the press conference, no reaction to what he said in the podcast is still a reaction of disappointment.
Jorge Salinas is a spokesperson for Equality California, the nation's largest statewide LGBTQ civil rights organization. He says they're monitoring the governor's discussions.
Our relationship continues to be a respectful one. We still believe that he is an ally of the LGBTQ plus community until we see otherwise in action.
Republican Assembly Leader James Gallagher is calling on the governor to take action on his words.
If this was a real priority for him, fairness for young women in this state, you think he might have been here. You think he might have made some calls.
And to the extent someone can and do it in a way that's respectful and responsible and could find the kind of balance, then I'm open to that discussion. That said, this is not where all my energy flows.
U.S. Education Secretary Linda McMahon has urged Newsom to implore state lawmakers to pass these bills. She warned that California could lose federal funds if it continues to allow transgender athletes in female sports. Dr. Canervo, the debate about transgender athletes in sports has been very dividing for some Americans. Can you share some insight on how this is affecting policies across the U.S.?
Well, it's affecting policies because, on the one hand, there are people who are very sympathetic to those who go through the gender changing process because of psychological issues. On the other hand, in the sports area, what we're seeing is that there have been examples such as in swimming and this past weekend in fencing, where women have rebelled against facing a transgender opponent or have accused the transgender opponent of having an unfair advantage because of having been a male early in life. And what has not been, it seems to me, clearly established is whether males, people who were born males who transition to a female status, do in fact possess hormonal advantage in the sport and in fact do have perhaps some advantage over women who have been women all their lives. And there really needs to be, I think, some sort of clarity on that expressed by the medical community so that we can kind of get to the bottom of this. On the one hand, you want to be sympathetic, I think, to those who want to transition for psychological reasons. On the other hand, given the importance of women's sports and women's competition, you want it to be, of course, absolutely fair. And you want it to be a situation where those who have transitioned to women don't have any kind of biological advantage.
Very true. I mean, there are a lot of female athletes that have spoken out publicly that they feel it is unfair, that they have trained so hard their entire lives, and they feel like there's just not an even matchup between someone who has transitioned to a woman and themselves. And I can understand why that argument is being made 100%. As we know, though, this current administration has put out an executive order, too, that says there are only two sexes, the biological sexes, male and female, and has undermined, in a sense, the gender identity of a lot of Americans as well.
Sure, and our own state, for example, has stopped medical support for those going through transitioning from one gender to another. And so it is a very difficult and divisive issue right now. What could very well happen, as you suggested, is that California and other states which refuse to follow the executive order of there being simply a permanent male and a permanent female based on birth, that education funds could be limited to those states. And of course, this is more going to affect high school and college, probably more particularly than the lower grades. And you don't want to see states like California and others losing a lot of money for their institutions because of the executive order.
Very true. And another thing I consider is, you know, trans women athletes in traditionally female-led sports is one issue, right? But there's a whole nother issue as well with anti-trans laws in general that are affecting people. And we know, based off of a 2024 study from the Trevor Project, that states that push anti-trans bills, they have higher suicide rates for people a part of that community. It's up about 72% in states that push those types of laws. And so I don't think that's the solution either.
Yes, yeah. You know, as you point out, it's just very difficult to look at both sides and come to an answer which is going to satisfy everybody equally.
Exactly, and in fact, it's hard to do that with anything, right? All Americans, we have our opinions about things, but I think the most important aspect of it is just remembering to have some compassion and humility, even if you can't specifically relate to yourself about situations that others are going through.
Sure, that's terribly important.
I agree. We'll be right back after this short break to discuss Florida debating changing their child labor laws. So stay tuned.
College life can be challenging, but everyone at Austin Peay should have access to success no matter what the obstacles. Whether it's workshops, support, or just someone to talk to, the Student Disability Resource Center is there to help students overcome their challenges and experience college life to the fullest. Don't go it alone. The Student Disability Resource Center is there to help you. You'll find the center in room 114 in the Morgan UC, or call them at 221-7777, 221-7777. A campus reminder from APSU-TV.
Thanks for sticking around. To close out our segment today, we'll be talking about how Florida is considering loosening their child labor laws to backfill positions left by deported migrants. How young is too young to work long hours? This question has ignited debate in Florida due to a recent bill in the state Senate. The bill lawmakers are advancing would loosen restrictions on teen work hours in the state. Ivan Rodriguez joins us to report on how some Floridians react.
For the owners of this classic America soda fountain in Tallahassee, loosening restrictions on child labor makes some sense.
Getting that half-hour break exactly at 4 hours or exactly at the right time so we don't violate is really hard to schedule.
For other business owners, it raises alarms.
We just hope it's not going to lead to kids having to make a tough decision as to whether they need to work or they can do those, things that everybody wants to do when they're kids.
A bill making its way through the Florida legislature would allow 16 and 17-year-olds to work more than 8 hours on a day when school is scheduled the next day and work over 30 hours a week during the school year without mandated meal breaks, and removes overnight work restrictions on 14 and 15-year-olds who are homeschooled, attend virtual school, or have already graduated. Governor Ron DeSantis argues this will help fill positions left by deported migrants.
What's wrong with expecting our young people to be working part-time now? I mean, that's how it used to be when I was growing up.
Do you believe that this bill would have an impact on a child's development?
Absolutely, because we already are seeing high levels of absenteeism.
Sadaf Knight with the Florida Policy Institute says children can already work longer hours through a waiver process involving parents, guardians, or a school superintendent.
Parents are essentially being excluded from the process of the decision making around how long and how much their kids work.
The bill sparking protests from some young Floridians at the state capitol.
Child labor protections are a crucial backstop to prevent corporations from exploiting young people in the state.
In Tallahassee, I'm Ivan Rodriguez.
Dr. Canervo, could Florida contemplating with this issue be an indicator of how other states might respond due to a lack of workers from deported migrants?
Well, I think so. My recollection is that Iowa has already, if not considered it, probably passed a piece of legislation which would allow younger people to work more hours. Iowa's very much an agricultural state, as you know, and with the heavy deportation of Latinos, what is happening is that those folks who have traditionally worked in the fields doing jobs that Americans would not take are not there anymore, and so someone has to be there to harvest the crops. And we're looking at children.
The obvious solution, I suppose.
To do that. And sure, get out and pick those apples, pick that cotton, pick the corn, whatever it might be. And that's, in my mind, very unfortunate that we're doing that. And it's an indication that maybe we need an improvement on the immigration system, certainly one that will satisfy a majority of people in regard to people coming across the border. But I would prefer to see some sort of enhanced guest worker program where we allow a certain number of foreigners to come into this country for the purpose of working, and maybe even attaining citizenship over time, rather than encouraging, I almost said forcing, but encouraging certainly, young people to spend their time working. If we're looking at 14, 15, 16-year-olds, it seems to me that those kids need other activities other than work. One of them, of course, is school. As the clip pointed out, it's going to mean perhaps fewer school hours for some kids. They're going to go to school tired. They're going to go to school less able to perform, perhaps, than they would otherwise. And I think that's, in the long run, not very beneficial to the country.
I agree, and we heard Ron DeSantis's comments about how in Florida kids should work, right? But in my opinion, in this day and age, with technology especially, we have so much at our fingertips, and I think we should just do our best to let kids be kids, right? I mean, they go to school, they might be involved in clubs or sports, and those are all great things. For me personally, if I had to work over 30, 40 hours a week in high school, I wouldn't have had the chance to grow as many skills as I did through the extracurriculars that I was able to partake in, right? And I think that is very important during that developmental stage as well. Working and earning money is important too, but you'll have plenty of time to do that as an adult. You know what I mean? And I understand that there is a need for workers. We knew this was going to happen when we heard about the mass deportations. This has come as no surprise to us. What I'm confused about is why in Florida they believe putting children as young as 13 to working longer hours is the solution to that problem. I don't think it is.
I don't understand the age either of 13. That's mighty young for kids to be working long hours. As a former teacher, I saw myself when I had students who worked generally at night that their performance there sometimes impacted their ability to perform in the classroom, and it detracts from the whole college experience, being in sports, being in clubs, being with your friends.
Exactly.
And of course, studying more. And so all of those things I think really do have a negative impact, and I'm sorry to see us moving in that direction as a country. I do think that, as you said, kids need to be kids for a little bit longer perhaps than they are now today.
Yeah.
That they face things too detrimental to their lives too early.
I agree.
And that we need to find another solution.
100%. I mean, even as a college student myself and as an adult who's been working since I was about 16 part-time, you know, even I find struggle in that work-life school balance, you know, all these assignments piling up and then working long hours on top of that. I don't think that's something that a kid should have to worry about unless it's a situation where they really have to work, right? But I don't think pushing towards all kids to just work more because we're lacking workers is the right step in that direction.
Yeah. You know, I could even see high school kids working maybe 2 hours an afternoon after school. Mm-hmm. But to work more than that, and you can earn some gas money or something for your car, or a little bit of money to help your parents with the groceries. But beyond that, I think really is too much. And it really hurts their childhood.
I agree, and we've already seen with my generation, even Generation Z, that mental health issues have been on the rise. And even since COVID, for a lot of people, mental health issues have been on the rise. And so I just would hate to see us put all this pressure and stress on the younger upcoming generation and have a similar result.
Right, and what I don't know is whether the law specified the kinds of jobs that younger people, 13, 14-year-olds could work in. But in Florida, for example, I'd sure hate to see a 13-year-old feeding alligators, for example, at a farm somewhere, alligator farm or whatever. And I would sure hate to see them working in factories with dangerous machines. So I think all of those things need to be taken into consideration. If you work at a fairly menial job, picking oranges, for example, which I suppose has its own stresses, but because you've got to work fast, but nevertheless, while that may be a fairly safe job, it nevertheless takes you away from lots of other things you ought to be doing.
I agree. I understand, though, why you're concerned about them working more difficult jobs, because those are the kinds of jobs, the hard labor jobs, that a lot of the migrants that were deported were filling, right? So I would hate to see a young person who isn't properly equipped to be in a tough position like that while juggling school and other issues as well.
Right, that's right.
Well, guys, unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. Thanks for tuning in for another edition of Inside the System. Make sure to come back again after Easter Sunday for our final episode of the season. See you next time.